Welcome back to PandaPen Club. Today I'm going to review the PenBBS 323. This pen was released in 2017, and although my route to this pen was born of disappointment, I'm going to tell you why I've come to completely adore it. This pen was presented to me in a gorgeous, stylish case with a robust colour scheme with a magnetic clip close. The logo subtly embossed in the black there. This is at the pricier end of the spectrum to the pens I usually review at 122 RMB, which is about $17.85 or £13.85. So I'm glad its presentation reflects what I consider to be a fairly pricey little object. I originally bought this pen to console myself because I couldn't conveniently get hold of the Montagut Koi Triangle pen. The Montagut features grip gouges, which the PenBBS does not. I have come to enjoy this pen greatly, and I am accordingly christening it a goldfish pen, or firefish pen, as goldfish was sometimes called in Imperial China. A few reasons for this, all of them present in the first impression. The feel, the texture. I find myself handling this pen quite unnecessarily, quite a lot of the time. It's made from perfect, blemish-free acrylic. It's so smooth, it's almost squeaky. I even go so far as to occasionally find myself gnawing on this pen. These acrobatics are made a little easier by the fact it's a very, very light pen, weighing in at 19 grams capped and 13 grams uncapped. When you're writing with this pen, you're going to be using it unposted because it does not post. Not one little bit. It's very unwilling to post. It's in fact impossible. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I would necessarily loll a goldfish around in my mouth for the sheer sensory delight of it. But the slick, soft nature of their little bodies probably isn't a million miles away from this perfection that we have with the acrylic here. There are, in fact, metal versions of this pen available as well, although they seem to be a little bit different in the design, particularly the threads. However, because the acrylic's just so lovely, I would strongly recommend considering the acrylic models. Now, as if all that weren't already perverted enough, I also find myself beaming at this pen just because it's so utterly gorgeous. The PenBBS 323 comes in a giddying array of different colour schemes, so maybe I'm pushing it a little bit to call it a goldfish pen since it comes in so many other alternative knickerbocker colours. However, I'm going to run with it. I've seen this type of patterning referred to as chatoyant, which means a band of reflected light caused by inclusions in gemstone or something. And you can see that in the acrylic here, the way the silvery, white, creamish, coralish pieces are interspersed also with these occasionally transparent parts, so you can see through the shaft of the pen in many different places, through to the converter, or indeed to what could be ink sloshing around, because this pen could be eyedroppered, and a little more on that later. We have our coralish red, our creamy silvery white, and our chatoyance going on, which really does reflect the coloration of a goldfish, the result of over 1,000 years of pseudo-selective breeding of fancy coloured carp by people in China. This began in the Jin dynasty, which is 265 to 420 AD. The reason this happened is the normally grey carp would occasionally spawn offspring with these bedazzling colours. These little mutants were scooped up by fishermen, and they were spared consumption because these fishermen, in addition to being fishermen, were also Buddhists. They believed that by depositing these spangly fish in what became known as ponds of mercy, they were engaging in an act of fang sheng, or self-purification. And the more unusual the variety of creature you spared, the more intense your self-purification, I believe. Quirky and colourful. Jin yu, goldfish, with yu being a homophone for yu, which means abundance. They were regarded as special, and they punched above their weight for their species. And I would say the same is true for the PenBBS 323. The last aspect of this pen which reminds me of a goldfish is the shape which on the one hand you could call deeply unusual. On the other hand, you could call reflective of dip pen design going back quite some time. And this theory as to the intentions of PenBBS marries up once you have a look at the PenBBS 267, which also reflects another variant of dip pen design. You can sort of see what they're going for here. You could also say this pen with its bulbous central shaft section area and its rear lower finial flare or spoiler being akin to the body and tail of a fish. In profile, I think it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to say this looks very like a little fish. The shape of goldfish varies tremendously. And this is because after the initial tending to mercy ponds where goldfish prospered and developed various different shades of pink, red and orange and yellow, in the 12th century we see various fancy folk bringing these fish into their own private water gardens, stocking them with the most beautiful, the most colourful, and it seems the most weird variants they possibly could. As a result, a lot of strange fruit have developed in the cast of goldfish that we see today. The veil tail, the telescope, the eggfish, the calico, the celestial, the bubble fish, the bluefish, the brown fish, the brocade, the pompon, the fantail, the lionhead, the tumbler, the comet, the meteor. I just wish pen manufacturers would occasionally reach for the creative naming conventions we see in animals when they're choosing what to name their pens. The length, as you see it now, is 139.1 millimeters capped and 128.8 millimeters, as you see it now, uncapped. And would you believe it? This reflects the average length of all goldfish species that they're capable of growing to, about 5 inches. The reason they rarely do so, the reason we only tend to see these bijou little varieties skipping around in tanks is precisely because they are kept in such confinement. And the whole bowl thing is something of a tragedy for the little goldfish because they thrive in spacious surroundings. Typically in China, they were only brought in to the house and kept in bowls when the fancy pants breeders of goldfish were visited by their even fancier friends. They were brought into the house in bowls for display. Imagine yourself dealing with the archetypal unexpected guests popping round. Instead of rushing to raid your cupboards and create some sort of, I don't know, hors d'oeuvre, you're rushing back and forth to the garden with a bowl of water trying to scoop up your most gorgeous and strange looking goldfish in order to entertain your guests. That's assuming this whole unexpected guests thing actually does happen. I wouldn't know because if somebody comes around to my house unexpectedly, I'm unlikely to answer the door. Other features that speak to the general build quality of this pen can be witnessed in a quick survey of the cap, which is a screw cap. It closes with 1 3/4 turns, and on the inside of the cap you can see we have a little ledge. And the end of the section pushes up against this ledge when you seal the pen, which creates a delightful little purr or squeak as it tightens shut and secures the nib in a hermetic little zone of its own, which presumably helps to prevent drying out. The sense of things being secure and indeed shipshape is also sustained by the not less than 3 O-rings that we have with this pen. The first 2 being at either end of the nib unit, and the third, more easily accessible, here on the top of the threads, keeping section and shaft sealed so that no ink is going to spill out in your pocket, and suggesting that this pen is intended as an eyedropper, should you wish. Meaning you could safely pour or otherwise deposit, perhaps with an eyedropper, ink directly into the shaft of the pen, carefully, without the converter, safely sealing it back inside and securing for yourself in excess of 3 mils of ink capacity, which would also be rather lovely if you chose your ink colour carefully because you have this wonderful chatoyant, translucent and indeed transparent aspect to the shaft. One thing that I have noticed, weirdly, given the overall quality and caliber of this pen, I feel, is that 1 out of 2 times when you replenish the ink supply in the converter, the feed tends to flood. So the first time you have touchdown on your page, you get a little flooding on the paper itself. It only happens once, just right after filling, the feed tends to flood. But that's something I would watch if you were going to eyedropper this pen. I haven't tried it myself. I haven't felt any special need to do so I can't speak to that. But that's one area I've noticed where this pen falls down slightly. It's a very mild complaint in my book. PenBBS began as an online community of fountain pen enthusiasts, and the pens they produce are a product of their collective wisdom and enthusiasm, similar to the selective breeding that resulted in our contemporary cherubic monster that is the goldfish via the internet, and has resulted in this wholly cherubic little pen. Now, all this enthusiasm would be rather shallow if the damn thing didn't write, but it certainly does. So let's move on to the writing sample. You get a really good view on this pen here, I think. Another reason I'm calling this the goldfish pen was an interesting thread I read a while back in one of the fountain pen groups on Facebook. It was possibly Fountain Pen Network. It was people discussing this koi or goldfish color scheme, as it's called and used on other fountain pens. Fountain Pen Network, some interesting people. One of the threads made me wonder whether I ought to neaten my handwriting when I'm doing these writing samples. I think not. I write how I write naturally in these writing samples because I think that's how you get the best idea on how you'll write naturally. There are some quite prescriptive people around who think you can't make a pen review if you don't have great handwriting. And some of them express this in quite a wry and an amusing way. And some of them express it with frothing vitriol. It's quite alarming, really. Words like trolls and snowflakes and what was the one? It was ROFLMHO. Something like that. I think it's some variant of lol. But anyway, it takes all sorts, doesn't it? Onto the writing sample for the glorious and really rather special PenBBS 3, 2, 3. I am writing with Pilot Iroshizuku Konpiki ink, and which looks wonderful and blue on this Muji A5 notepad. One of the most tremendous A5 notepads ever invented by humankind. And as I assume you can see by now, this is just a lovely, lovely, even-tempered, even-flowed fountain pen to write with. Really good, solid, steady and reliable flow of ink there. The line, this is deemed by PenBBS to be a fine nib, 0.5 millimeters, but it really does lay down a more of a medium-sized line. As soon as I got this pen, I noticed a degree of feedback when I held the pen at a more gentle slope compared to when I held the pen more towards 90 degrees, so more perpendicular. I found the writing was really smooth. As I used the pen more and more, I found less and less feedback when holding the pen at a slope. I think because whatever little abrasions or abrasiveness on the tipping substance of the nib, I think I wore them down with use. But I think it's still slightly smoother, slightly more delectable when it's held at this steeper angle. And I don't mind holding it like this, actually. The shape almost seems to me to have been designed to rest more against your knuckle, if that's what you want to do. But it writes just as nicely, if not slightly wetter, when held in a more conventional way. Lovely. Panda. Six, jinxed, zebra, 4, quick, game of whist. It's a joyous pen to use, joyous in every way, joyous to look at. It's easy to write quickly. The ink flow really does keep up. Soft, smooth. The nib itself is beautiful. Quite a dramatic design. It cuts inwards into a very elegant and lengthy stiletto-ish point. And there's the wonderful, elaborate, and quite groundbreaking in a way, scroll work of PenBBS along with the name of the brand imprinted on the nib. It's a beautiful pen. I can't help but sit around marveling at it, enjoying it, and I recommend it to you. If you enjoyed this review, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Panda Pen Club on YouTube. And when you click that subscribe button, please don't forget to click the bell. That really helps us and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.